Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of the Economic Development, Skills and Culture Policy Committee. The meeting today is open to the public and will be webcast, and the recording will also be available for people to view later on through the Council's website. It's also possible that Sheffield Live TV will record and rebroadcast this meeting. We have received no questions from members of the public. Please can I request that mobile telephones and other such equipment are switched to silent mode so as not to disturb the conduct of the meeting. Yep. There's no fire test planned today. If there is an emergency evacuation, please take instruction from the Town Hall staff, and as usual the assembly point is Tudor Square. My name is Martin Smith. I'm chair of the committee, and I'll just ask members to introduce themselves. We'll go from the right this time.
Hello, it's Councillor Brian Holmshaw, Councillor for Bromhill and Sharrow Vale.
Councillor Henry Nottage, member for Hillsborough.
Councillor Barbara Masters, Councillor for Ecclesall.
Councillor Curtis Crossland, member for Bayton.
Laura Moynihan, Councillor for Manor Castle.
Minesh Parrott, Councillor for Crooks and Crossball and Deputy Chair. Abdul Qayyum, Councillor for Firth Park.
Okay, thank you very much. We have no apologies for absence. The meeting is open to the public.
Apologies, that's come up.
Fine, just getting instruction. Declarations of interest. Do any members wish to declare an interest in any items of business today? Councillor Nottage.
I own a business that received a carbon survey under UKSPF but did not receive any support.
Thank you for that. Anyone else? One item I do apologise. Councillor Fox sent his prior apologies. He's a bit poorly. Minutes of the previous meeting. Can I ask any members, do they have any comments on the minutes of the meeting held on 8th of November, or can we accept them as a true record? Any objections? In that case, they're accepted. Public questions and petitions. As I said before, we have no questions or petitions from members of the public, but I have received 3 questions from members of the committee. There is a maximum time limit of 10 minutes for supplementary questions. This item of business is to provide an opportunity for members who have submitted a question to ask one supplementary question for each one of those asked. So, colleagues, page 1. Councillor Moynihan.
Could I ask you a supplementary, Chair, to that question? Is this where I do it?
Yep.
Yeah.
Fire away.
Okay, thank you. I see there are informal links with the Chamber and officers and SYMCA officers, but could you tell me where there's any political involvement? It just seems to be the Chamber and SYMCA Business Advisory Board, and informal links between SYMCA officers and City Council officers, but there doesn't seem any political involvement there.
I can give you my view on that, or do you want to go first, Diana? Okay, so my view is SYMCA changed their structure recently, So previously, the chair of this committee sat on something called the Business Recovery Board, which covered some of the issues that you've raised. That was changed, and now all political input to SYMCA goes via the leader of the council. So it's one point of contact. So that is the arrangement. In my personal opinion, having everything go through one particular person, apart from giving them a heck of a workload, isn't particularly consistent with the committee system. However, that's a decision for SYMCA, not the council. Diana, do you wish to add anything?
Thank you. Yeah, only that their new business advisory board that they've set up doesn't have political representation, other than I think the mayor attends it, and our business board doesn't have political membership. However, our board does feed into this board, of which Louisa is a co-host of our diverse business board and sits on the MCA's business board. So we can get feedback through Louisa through this committee if that's something you would like to seek. But there's no political representation on those boards.
Okay, anything on page 2? Page 3? Page 4? Okay, thank you very much. So now we go on to our work programme. And I believe, Amanda, you'll be taking us through the highlights of what's coming up.
Thank you, Chair. I've nothing further to add other than what's on the amendments on page 20, unless Diana has anything to add. We have had some other items come since the publication of this work programme, so those will be circulated at the next opportunity.
So, any comments? Councillor Crossland.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at the work programme, I can see that the LGBTQ plus quota has been on the waiting for a date list for quite a while. And I understand that this is meant to be joint work with TRC, and they are a very busy committee. But I think that there might be options for us to try and sort of get the ball rolling, particularly looking at the public engagement toolkit, because obviously this is something that we want to help the community rather than do it for a community. So I'm just wondering if there's an opportunity for us to sort of use the public engagement toolkit to try and get the ball rolling with this.
Thank you. Before I bring in officers, was it on the same point?
Thank you, Curtis, and for your patience on this. We have been working with Will Stewart, who's the Director Lead for the TRC committee, around this as part of the local plan and some of the city centre regeneration plans. It's part of their discussions, so I know work is underway, and we've been working with them on that as well. We've also been taking some soundings from the sector, and we plan to do that in a more detailed way in the new year along the lines of the public engagement toolkit. In addition to that, we've also been looking at Pride as a key event for the city and how we can look at that. So it's quite a big and complex item. As we've kind of acknowledged here before, work is being done in the background. So potentially in the new year, we could do an informal member briefing and then formulate whether it needs to come to EDS or TRC after that. Does that sound like a way forward? Thank you.
I've got Councillor Perek.
Thanks, Chair. Just a quick question about, in February, we've got an item on the culture strategy. I've had a general chat with Rebecca about what member engagement will look like, but I was going to make a suggestion that we might want to reach out to the LACs and see if they might be able to have public and member engagement sessions about the culture strategy. I know there was some quite good work around the Race Policy Commission that went to some of the LACs, and I think this is a good opportunity to highlight something that is really exciting coming forward.
Yeah, thank you for that. There's been a phase 1 of the engagement has started with the sector. So at the moment, there's a survey going out for people who are working or engaged in the sector in some way to actually listen around what are the key things that are important to them. In January, you'll receive an update report, which is kind of the SWOT analysis of the sector, and some data as a baseline report. On the back of that, there'll be a second engagement phase, which will include workshops with the local community, workshop with the sector, one-to-one interviews. So it's at that point, Councillor, that I think there'll be member interaction. We can invite you to some of those sessions, run an informal briefing with this committee separately, and happy to take that idea of utilising LACs. It worked really well on the city goals, so I'll take that forward. Thank you.
I'll go to Henry next and then Laura.
Was Laura's question on the same subject? Oh, okay. I'll jump on. Continuing the theme of correct engagement with the public, I'd like to suggest that added to the work programme is some early engagement with businesses in Sheffield around workplace parking, following the amendment that was passed at full council on the 6th of December, saying that relevant policy committees should consider placing on their work programmes consideration of income generating schemes. One of the lessons we can learn from Nottingham is that early, frequent and continued engagement with businesses was key to making that work.
Thank you. I'll avoid the politically, just to clarify, so it's the potential, getting feedback from businesses on the potential impact. Early engagement, okay, so which would be relevant to this committee. Okay, we can put that on the list and have the discussion. Laura.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Right, it's not working. It's on the employment and skills strategy. Did that actual task and finish group happen? Because I'm not aware of it.
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, we went out to procurement in November, and unfortunately we didn't have a strong enough response to that procurement, so we've held it and going out to procurement again in January. So the task and finish group hasn't started yet, other than we've circulated the specification. You've all commented on that because the work has been delayed. We decided we wanted to test a bigger field in terms of kind of consultants team to work with us. And as you'll see on the agenda today, we've got the MCA skills strategy, employment skills strategy that's being developed. And we want to make sure that we're dovetailing with that. So actually going out to procurement in January and kind of coming in off the back of that works. So yes, it's not that it's not been missed. We're slightly delayed on that piece of work. Thanks.
And one item for me, we've all been doing our homework and thinking. The Strategy and Resources Committee, Councillor Prek was there as well, had an excellent and very moving presentation from care leavers, articulating some of the challenges that they face. And I wonder whether something in our future agenda around what we can do as a committee, and thinking particularly of lifelong learning and skills, what we can do to help those young individuals. I have mentioned that briefly to the Director of Education, and he'd be up for that, and he's going away to think about what they can do.
Yeah, excellent. Happy to add that to the work programme. And also the employment and skills team got an accreditation recently. We've been delivering a local supported employment project, and it was returning the best results in the country. So it would be great to kind of showcase some of that, and it's kind of supporting vulnerable young people as well. So I think it'd be good to showcase that at the same time, if that makes sense. Thanks.
Thank you for that. If there are no more comments, and there are excellent inputs there, colleagues. The report contains some recommendations for approval, subject to the other amendments and additions that we've raised. Are we all agreed on that? Anybody no? Okay, that's agreed. Thank you. We then move on to the Q2 budget monitoring report, and I believe Jane is going to give us the highlights. Hi, Jane.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Jane Wilby, Head of Accounting. The paper you've got gives you an update on the Q2 budget monitoring information for 23-24. Every policy committee has received the same update this month, so some members in the room might have already heard this update. The committee's last update was in September on the Q1 outturn position. At Q2, the Council's forecasting an overspend in the General Fund of 17.4 million against a net revenue budget of 487 million, which is a 3.6% variance. The Q1 position forecasted an overspend of 17.6, so not a big movement between the quarters, but we have seen a large movement of 2 million in Education, Children and Families Committee, due to the fact that we're not going to receive a proportion of the income we'd forecast from health partners this year for integrated commissioning activities. The 2 million was largely offset through an upside in our capital financing budget. Economic conditions have continued to yield good interest returns on our investments. Slippage in the capital programme has delayed the need for borrowing and strengthened the overall cash position, so the interest returns have been above budget. The three main areas of overspend at the Council are adult social care, children's social care and homelessness. In adults, we've seen a huge investment bringing down the average costs following the spike that we saw in the pandemic, but the service does continue to be challenged by increasing demand and an inflating cost base. In children's, we've got huge challenges from the rising cost of placements, which is caused by the limited supply we have in the city, alongside a shortage of foster carers to support the demand. We also have rising costs of home-to-school transport provision. The homelessness situation has arisen post-lockdown, coupled with a shortage of affordable housing in the city and a limited range of options. Our use of hotel and bed and breakfast accommodation has reached an unsustainable and unaffordable level. The increase in homelessness is a national issue, and there are now more than 100,000 households in temporary accommodation, which is the highest level for 20 years. In spite of the emerging challenges, the £47 million worth of budget savings plans that we put in place as part of the 23-24 budget are currently 80% on track to deliver, with a further 12% that will be delivered in 24-25. The good news on the Economic Development and Skills Committee is that the committee is forecast to balance to the 10.9 million net revenue budget this year, and the £500,000 worth of savings targets are also set to be delivered in full. The issues here in Sheffield are not unique, and councils across the country are experiencing the same challenges and same financial context. And we've seen 4 local authorities in the past 12 months declare insolvency, issuing 114 notices, Nottingham being the most recent. Sheffield City Council has been able to manage overspends against budget by drawing from reserves for the past 2 financial years, and will do so again this year if no further in-year mitigations are brought forward. We set aside 70 million of our reserves in 2021 for budget contingency, and we'll have 13 million remaining at the end of the year, but reserves can only be used once, and ours are depleting as our overspends continue. The autumn statement offered no reassurance from government that there will be any additional funding for local authorities. The medium-term financial analysis was presented in September to the Strategy and Resources Committee, highlighting a £61 million budget gap over the next 4 years, with 18 falling into next year. Services have been developing solutions and bringing forward savings proposals to recent committee meetings. All policy committees will make the final decisions in December. The local government financial settlement was announced on Monday, and finance colleagues are working through the detail and assessing the impact on the overall position. Tomorrow at the Strategy and Resources Committee, they'll be asked to make a recommendation on those savings to date, and then at February 21st in 2024, the Strategy and Resources Committee will recommend the full budget to Council. The Council must continue to drive delivery of budgets in year, savings plans, and to tackle those in-year overspends to prevent that budget gap from widening. The committee is asked to note the Council's financial position for Q2 23-24. The Q3 position will be brought back to committees in March.
Thank you, Jane. Colleagues, any questions on the 23-24 budget? Okay, in that case, the recommendations before us are to note the updated information and management actions on the 23-24 revenue budget as described in the report. Do we agree on that? Anybody disagree? In case that's carried. Thank you very much for the update, Jane. So we move on to item 9, which is a proposed grant agreement between Sheffield City Council and DocFest for 2024 to 2026. I believe we have Emma and, I'm really sorry.
Do you want to introduce
Annabelle.
yourself? Yeah.
Okay.
Hi everybody, I'm Emma France, Service Manager at Marketing Sheffield, and I'm pleased to be joined by...
I'm Annabelle Grundy, Managing Director of Sheffield DocFest.
So we've got the opportunity to ask questions directly to Annabelle as well. So do you want to say anything, Di, or should we go straight in? Lovely. Okay, so this is all about entering into a new grant agreement with DocFest for the next 3 years to the level of £100,000 per year. As everyone probably knows, DocFest is the UK's leading documentary festival and one of the world's most influential markets for documentary projects, and it's been in Sheffield for 30 editions and 30 years now. Some key headline figures from DocFest in 2023, it attracted 2,272 industry delegates from 69 countries to Sheffield for a 10-day period, which equates to an estimated economic impact of almost £2 million to Sheffield. Spread over multiple venues, provides a valuable contribution to Sheffield's cultural offer and achieves almost 40,000 public admissions for the year, and 60% of those were from Sheffield or South Yorkshire area. In 2023, they premiered 114 films, 37 of which were world premieres, and their marketplace event, the Meat Market, typically does around about £7 million of deals. So, in proposing the support, we've ensured that this event continues to support our 5 key principles that we always look to when Sheffield City Council supports an event, and I'll summarise those briefly. So that's around economic impact. So I've just said that Sheffield DocFest achieves an economic impact of around about 2 million for our economy. It's worth saying that this is a 2,000% return on investment, which is quite an impressive figure. And it also heavily supports the local supply chain. DocFest use a lot of local venues, a lot of local businesses, and obviously the footfall helps the businesses in the city. It supports the city's brand and reputation. It's globally recognised, a globally recognised event, and it's an engine for documentary film worldwide, so it's regarded as 5th in the world. So that's a massive reputational and brand success for Sheffield. It also has a huge amount of community benefits, which are detailed in the report. Local audiences are really important to DocFest, and they have been committed to the city for 30 years. They also have significant diversity in the organisation and makeup of the makeup of their organisation, and programme, and they work with a lot of key partners to ensure that they're delivering a whole host of community benefits. And DocFest also supports some of our other key strategies that we've talked about at previous committees, including our destination management plan, where we're looking to make our events programme more robust, diverse and greater, and also our emerging culture strategy, which you're all aware of. So given this success, you might say, well, why does DocFest still need some support? Well, there's still a great need for public funding for events like DocFest, and despite an extremely successful year, with audience growth of above 40% and sales income growth of about 20%, the festival remains challenged, as does many of the events and the cultural economy, by the impact of the pandemic, the reduction in public funds across cultural funders and local authorities, and rising costs. Multi-year funding agreements like these go a really long way to support the sustainability and stability of organisations like DocFest, and really they are the foundation of leveraging other funding sources, particularly from places like the Arts Council. Post-pandemic, I think it's fair to say the charity's in a weakened, unrestricted reserves position, and compared to pre-pandemic years, 2023 turnover was 77% of the 2019 festival, before factoring in significant inflationary pressures affecting all budget lines, and in particular around venues, energy and staffing costs, which obviously is affecting many events. So Sheffield City Council support is vital in supporting the festival team as they re-stabilise the organisation, develop new, impactful, growth-orientated activity that further diversifies its income streams and impacts. Loss of the vital support from Sheffield City Council would severely impact the charity's ability to plan, to be ambitious and to absorb the risks associated with cultural event provision year on year, and obviously ultimately its position in Sheffield's events calendar going forward.
Thank you very much. Before I open it up, I'll just say it was a pleasure reading this particular report. Colleagues, any questions? So I've got Barbara, Laura, Henry. Okay, should we start with, I'll go Barbara, Laura, and then we'll go this side.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, yeah, I agree. Excellent. I'm really pleased to see it. I'm looking at 4.4, climate implications, page 49. And at the bottom, I mean, you've done most of the work to reduce the footprints, but it's all based within the venues. Absolutely brilliant. You know, but the last paragraph says you're working on offsetting the impact of travel. Now, what about travel within Sheffield? I mean, sort of, because we really don't want more cars on the road. Haven't got a bus system that works. Have you thought about how to make it easier for delegates to move around the city while they're here? I mean, I'll leave it to you to think about. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a really great question. I think what we'd say is that most of the activity for the festival is located in the city centre, and so it's really a walkable festival. The main travel impact for our delegates is them getting to Sheffield. We really encourage them to come by train. We obviously don't have an airport. It's a good question, though. We haven't looked at South Yorkshire and anything that we could do to encourage sustainable travel there, so we'll take that one back to the team. Thank you.
Laura?
Thank you, Chair. I really welcome, as you know, I'm a big supporter of DocFest. The breadth and diversity of it is fantastic, and the return on investment is really fantastic as well. Use the word twice. But given this is a three-year funding, three-year agreement, how regularly will we receive reports on how you're moving towards sustainability? Because yes, we've got 3-year funding agreement, but we hope that isn't the end of DocFest. And I'd want to see how you're progressing to becoming self-sustaining. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to say, we felt it important to do a 3-year agreement because that matches some of the leveraging we can do with some of this. 1-year funding is really difficult to leverage. For example, MPO funding is a 3-year agreement. Actually, DocFest lost their MPO status this year, so they want to see long-term investment from the council to kind of try and gain some of that back. Annabelle is done an amazing job since she took over DocFest, I have to say. So some of these results this year are due to her hard work, so I'll let her talk about sustainability. But I did just want to make the point that festivals like this will always need some public investment. It might be less than this, and last year we did cut DocFest from 150 to 100,000, so they're already on that journey. But it will always need a level of public investment for the type of kind of arts and culture-based event that it is. And because it's the foundation funding that then leverages in everything else. So I just wanted to make that point before handing over.
Thanks very much. And thanks, Diana, very kind words. I think it's fair to say we saw really significant income growth this year in earned income, and I'm hoping that we continue on an upward trajectory. I'm not expecting that trajectory to be as significant as it was this year because we had a real change from post-pandemic uncertainty. But I feel that what we've been doing to strengthen our reputation internationally and our industry programme is boding really well for that earned income. And as in the report, we are really seriously looking at diversifying sources of support for the festival, both through strengthening our community activity and other kind of innovation or technology funds or other sources of support. For me, I will echo that the 3 years of funding from the council is what helps us to be ambitious. We have an unavoidable amount of core costs that have to be met and then enable us to have stability and be forward-looking and be ambitious and creative as well. But I do really also recognise massive pressure on local authorities, so we're really grateful for the support. Don't know if I've answered your question.
It might just be worth saying that we have regular touch points, obviously, with DocFest in terms of kind of monitoring kind of how things are going, and there's a yearly festival report which is incredibly comprehensive.
If I could just come back on that. I mean, I don't disagree. We shouldn't have 1 year funding. I agree with the 3-year funding. You need some certainty. But I would like a report to come back after the DocFest this year, just refreshing what the headlines are, what participation there was, you know, just how successful it's been and whether there are any pointers for the future.
No problem whatsoever, we can totally do that. We do receive an annual report as a accountable body anyway, so it'd be very easy to share it with committee and invite Annabelle.
Thanks, guys. To share, several people have indicated to share the questions out. I'm going to go Brian, Curtis, Henry, Minesh. So, Brian, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I've had the pleasure of a briefing recently from yourself, Fliss. So I'm going to reiterate one of the questions I asked there, so give you a further opportunity. So we're going to get stability and we're going to get some certainty, and you are, certainly. But what are going to be your ambitions other than that for DocFest over the next 3 years? You've got a 3-year opportunity if we agree to this. So what are you going to go for?
Thanks for the opportunity to rehash some of what I said at the pre-committee meeting. One thing that's really important to us is community impact. So we're really setting our sights on improving public audiences, making sure that people of Sheffield and South Yorkshire feel welcome at DocFest and actually come and access and participate in a really significant cultural event. We've got conversations in play at the moment with other cultural organisations, including Rotherham Children's Capital of Culture and also Bradford City of Culture. So we're really looking at what we can do with other festivals and events with a northern identity and community outreach so that we can be visible to broader audiences and also make an impact. And I hope to come back with some really good news soon on one of those. In terms of 3 years, I am also looking to strengthen our marketplace. We actually have just today completed recruitment of a new head of industry who I can't announce publicly, but will be taking us forward in the international arena. They have really significant film industry experience. And so in terms of raising the calibre of the decision makers, funders and commissioners that come to our market, we really feel that we're starting to rebuild strength back in that area as well. So it's two things. It's making an impact for local audiences and the cultural offer, and also doing all we can to help the documentary industry, because same as the events, the creative and cultural industries and freelancers in particularly have been hard hit by the last few years.
Thank you. Curtis, next question.
Could I just put a slight follow-up on that?
Go on.
Thank you. So great to hear that you're actually going to be working with a few more local authorities throughout Yorkshire in particular. I don't think Sheffield does enough of that, actually, feeding off the West Yorkshire audience. I myself went up to Bradford to see one of the launch events they've got for the City of Culture during Diwali. And it was fantastic, you know, what they've been able to do and what they've been able to release from their City of Culture work. So if we can work with them and have some partnership going, I think that's all to the benefit of Sheffield as a city. Thank you.
Curtis.
Thank you. Thank you for the report and the previous presentation. DocFest is clearly a great source of economic activity for the city and good branding for the city as well. And it's very good at pulling visitors into the city. And as you mentioned, I think, was it 60% of attendees are from the local area? But as I'm guessing, I'm probably your sort of target market. I knew of DocFest, but until I read in and researched for this upcoming meeting, I didn't know that I'd find it interesting. So do you think that there's room to grow locally, and try and get, kind of linking with what Barbara was talking, like local attendees will have to travel less and would be better for the environment as well?
Sure, thank you. We do think about this a lot. We currently have a year-round screening programme with Showroom Cinema in Sheffield, so we present a monthly programme of documentary, usually with talks and other engagement activity. We've also been doing some work with local libraries, mostly concentrated again in the city centre, but looking at how we can expand that this year, and looking at some site-specific screenings as well, because, yeah, as you say, people need to be shown that they're welcome, and one of the best ways to do that is actually to go to where they're at.
Okay, Henry, you're up next.
Thank you, Chair. As usual, the wisdom of colleagues in the room has rendered some of my questions pointless, but I'll carry on with what I've got left. It's been a real honour to be able to be part of the support for DocFest, and it's a wonderful example of something that is taking quite a small amount of public funds, and the council doesn't have to do it, but we are privileged and able to do it, and it's bringing in so much more for the city as a whole. So I really hope it goes from strength to strength and can hopefully become self-sustaining at some point. But I also think it's very important that we find a mechanism to get some of the economic activity that things like DocFest brings to the city as a cashable gain to the council, so that we can continue to invest in not just DocFest, but new things that come up. Because whenever there's a new opportunity that hasn't been tried before, it's going to need more support from the local authority. And it's really shown through DocFest how much that can then bring to the city as a whole, not just economically, but culturally. And, you know, it's really interesting, the whole fest, and I hope it goes from strength to strength, and I hope that we find a way to be able to support things going forward more. I think that's about it. I don't think I even had a question left in that.
You can come back to that if you want, but it sounded like good news to me.
I can just acknowledge that we've had this conversation a couple of times here that was just talking about how we get more sustainable funding into our events programme at large. We had the events paper last committee to talk and look at that. So we are exploring mechanisms to do that. I think it's a bigger thing than DocFest, yeah.
Yes.
Thanks, and thanks for the report. I mean, as Martin said, it's a really pleasing report to really actually have any specific questions about DocFest. It's very happy with what's proposed. My question is more about, so 4.2.1 says the grant will come from the existing strategic events budget. I guess I wanted to ask specifically what proportion of the strategic events budget is this taking? And obviously at the last meeting, we proposed looking at what we can do to enhance and develop the major events plan. Do we need to have a specific reference to what we could deliver if we had a larger strategic events budget in future as well?
The strategic events budget is 285,000, of which this is 100,000, so it's a fair proportion of it. The reason that we had to reduce the funding last year is because that is under pressure from the inflationary pressure of events that are already in that programme, and the desire to do more and more as a city. As well as offering some of that up to potential service reductions. So as we discussed last time, the more that we have in that events budget, the more proactive we can be and securing more events for the city. We're really successful at securing sporting events where there's a bidding process, but actually when it comes to cultural events, it's often what you curate yourself rather than buy in, and that does take a long-term funding, often with local organisations. I think DocFest is a great example of that, 30 years in the city, but we have got others like No Bounds in the city that are up and coming that could do similar to tramlines over the long term. So the answer is yes, but obviously there is a pressure there from the whole of the council's budget position, so it's balancing that against other things.
Councillor Cohen.
Thank you, Chair. More of a comment than a question, Chair, really. Just to say, well, just to echo what other colleagues have said, really, in terms of it's very positive report, very pleased to read it, and I think it was, it was a good reading. Very good return on investment, as it says in the report, and I think I'm sort of just pleased that, the DocFest is going from strength to strength, really, as it seems. So hopefully it will continue to do so, and maybe rely even less on. I'm aware that obviously it won't entirely be, going down to zero contribution from the local authority, but hopefully it will get less as it is done this year. But certainly a very good report, and very pleased to read it. Thank you very much, and good luck.
Thank you. And a final positive comment from me. I said it made pleasant reading. I was particularly impressed by the section on community benefits. We get a lot of reports, and a lot of reports talk about community benefits. There was some really good positive stuff in there, lots of clear metrics. So I particularly enjoyed reading that section. So thank you very much for that. Colleagues, I think I know where this is going. We have some recommendations in front of us. In two parts. So first recommendation is to award a 3-year grant to DocFest for the sum of £100,000 a year for 3 years to support the delivery of DocFest in Sheffield between 2024 and 2026. And to note that the funding, as we've discussed, will be drawn from the Strategic Major Events Fund. So colleagues, that's the recommendation. Laura,
Could I add one about reporting back? Could I ask what I asked, that said about reporting back after this year's event? Annual report, yeah.
Apologies, I forgot about that. Yeah. Are we all agreed with that amendment? And are we all agreed, therefore, on the recommendations? Nobody's disagreeing, so I'll take that as unanimous. Thank you ever so much for coming in, and I look forward to coming into DocFest this year. Thank you very much. So a little bit of confusion here. Next on my list is the SYMCA update. Are we going to SPF, or are you doing both, Ben? Sorry, I couldn't quite catch that. We're doing SPF next?
No, it is FLIS next.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ben's that keen to talk about SPF. Hi, Fliss. Over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, members. So, firstly, let me thank you for giving me this opportunity to be able to talk about the update on where we are with the South Yorkshire skills strategy. I haven't met any of you before, I don't think, so I am new in role. I've been at the Combined Authority for about 2 months, and I am the Director of Skills at SYMCA. I also want to express my gratitude to the officers who've been working very closely with us, so Di and also Laura, in the development of the Regional Skills Strategy too. This is by way of an update of where we are. It's been long coming in terms of the strategy, and so therefore it's really to let you know where we've come from, where we're going to, and the timeline for approval, and would really welcome, as we're in development stage, it's really welcoming your feedback as well on the proposals and where we are thus far. Apologies, this looks really small, and this is where I probably need glasses, but I will try and canter through the slides and talk through them in as much detail as I think appropriate. So the regional strategy has been something that's been missing, and something that all of our constituent authorities have been looking at to therefore make sure we have an overarching strategy of which each local authority can therefore also have a strategy that sits alongside and works to
the regional skills strategy. So we've got a timeline there. We're almost at the end. So we have developed an objective and vision statement. We've developed 3 mission areas, which I'll talk through. We're now starting to look at what the interventions should be, followed by actions, and then, I guess most importantly, looking at the metrics. I think too often we look at amount of money spent, where what we really need to do is making sure that we're having value for money, but also the impact of the spend that we're taking forward. As you would expect, this isn't rocket science necessarily. These are the key stakeholders, which I think any skills strategy would want to make sure that have been involved in the development and also in the delivery going forward. And these slides will be available to you if you haven't already seen them as well. So I won't talk about all the detail there, and appreciate that the writing really is a little too small for us here today. But for each of the different stakeholders, it just provides a statement of where we think the strategy needs to go. And this gets even smaller, doesn't it? Apologies. And so we have 3 mission areas, and I think it's hard to not agree with these mission areas. And I also think that if you were to look at the majority of areas across the whole of the UK, you'd probably come across the 3 mission areas as well. They are by design quite broad, and what we need to do within those mission areas is to bring down interventions to make sure that we take that forward by place needs. So
sorry to interrupt, Fliss. Just for information, I know there's at least one member of the committee that has visual impairment, so that if there, I know you said this, it's quite small print, if there is anything you think that you want to highlight from that, if you can do that verbally, please, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have 3 mission areas, and you're right, these are important, and so I will read these out to you. So the first mission area is to raise attainment of core knowledge and skills. So this is focusing on our residents who currently don't have skills up to level 2. So that's equivalent of a GCSE level. And a significant proportion of residents across the whole of the combined authority area and within Sheffield 2 simply don't have any qualifications at all. And so a large proportion of spend needs to continue funding the lower level and basic skills needs that we have across the region. The second mission area is therefore not only to look at basic skills, but ensure that we have the right supply of high-skilled residents to meet our workforce demands. And so therefore this is focusing not only on ensuring we have a supply of people with the higher level skills, but making sure that we're also working on the business side to make sure that we're creating those jobs as well, so then we don't lose our higher skilled residents from the combined authority area. And thirdly, a problem that's affecting the majority of the country, but significantly here in South Yorkshire, is the rising levels of economic inactivity. And whilst students do form part of that, we also have concerns around the number of our residents who have long-term health conditions, and a number of different areas of which we really need to address where we can through different interventions. So I think those 3 mission areas are really quite self-explanatory, probably what you would expect to see. But where the detail now comes, and where the detailed work that we're undertaking is, as a combined authority, what are the interventions that we need to fund? What are the areas where we need to convene and to influence? And what are the areas where we need to campaign? And that's the area that we're currently looking into at the more detailed interventions. So these slides are currently with all local authority officers to therefore provide input. These are not a finished article, but a direction of travel. So therefore, we need to have a look at how we, with a flat level devolved adult education budget, where do we need to focus spend? Are we focusing spend on the right geographical areas? Are we focusing on the right level of qualifications? And so that's something that we're starting to work through. We also need to make sure that we're aware of our outcomes of delivery as well. At the moment, too many courses, we don't know the outcomes, and a number of our residents are going through a number of different programs, but not actually moving on to the next level. So something else that we also need to look at as well. We need to make sure that we simplify our processes, especially around the AEB procurement. I know there's been challenges in the past there. And also have a look at, do we have any capital requirements in the skills space? And are we ready, if there's a call for funds or a call for bids, are we ready on what we think we need in the region in terms of skills provision? Also campaigning. We know that there's a level 4 devolution deal on the table at the moment, but if we could go further, what are the things that we need to make sure that our skills provision and funding works for us within the region? And also looking at as our role as a convener and working very closely with stakeholders from the third sector, from local government, from our businesses. How do we make sure that the skills system works better together? We have a finite amount of funds, so therefore how can we ensure there's no duplication, but we're making the money that we have work the best we can do for our residents and also our businesses too. And perhaps an area that we haven't been good at or sufficiently good at is evaluating and analysing the impact of each of the programmes that we take forward. So how can we ensure that we strengthen that function too, to make sure that we learn from each programme that goes forward. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here. This is really just to let you know how we're starting to structure. So for each of the mission areas, what we're trying to do is by intervention, look at the areas where we're going to fund, where we're going to campaign, and also where we need to convene. And these are currently slides which, as I said, are with local authority officers, college principals, a number of stakeholders to make sure that we get the right input and the right level of detail. I'm not going to go into any detail on these at all, but we'll circulate them if there's any further comments. Some of the things I should probably mention as well is that all of this, the strategy has been built on a significant evidence base, and that evidence base has been published and is available, and I can make sure that all members have access to that as well. The plan is that we will go to our MCA board in March for final sign-off. And so we're just in the final process now of looking at what interventions should be, making sure that at the right level, so each local authority area has enough scope to be able to deliver what you need to for a region as well. So give an overarching strategic framework so that you also can develop the strategy of which Di has already referred to earlier on today. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you for that. Before I open it out to questions, I know you said you were relatively new to role. If you had to pick one thing out of the challenges that you've just described to us, which one would it be? Because sometimes first impressions are the best. So if you had to pick one, what would it be?
That's a very good question. I think currently it's how can we get the different stakeholders, actors in the system to work together and have a multi-agency approach to the challenges that we have, such as health conditions, such as sometimes I think we try to use the wrong intervention to get somebody where they need to be. And so it's how can we work together better as a system to make sure that residents access the support that they need at the time they need. And I don't think we're quite there yet.
That's a very clear answer. Minesh was first out of the traps, then I'll go Curtis, Henry, Laura.
Thanks, Martin. Thank you for that. It's really helpful to see some of the thinking of where the MCA is coming from. It'll be great to get these slides and also have a clear indication of what political processes this is going through as well before it gets final approval, and also what political thinking has gone into its development so far. I guess the question I specifically had was, there was a real emphasis on meeting workforce demands and employers' needs. I know the MCA has done a lot of work working with the TEC, and also funds the TEC Skills Development Officer, which has a very, the reverse. It's focusing on employees' skills needs and skills requirements rather than what employers want and need, because obviously employers don't always know best how to drive a local economy and meet skills needs. How does that role marry up with yours, and how are they involved in developing this work and how trade unions more broadly involved in developing this work to make sure we are also speaking to employees' skills needs, not just employers.
So, whilst talking about, I guess, the employment side, one of the things is this skills strategy is very much individual focused, and so therefore it's making sure that we have both sides representative. So we are speaking to a number of different individuals, we are consulting with a number of individuals, including the trade unions, of something that I will forward to all of you as members as well. We will be holding a webinar in January. We're trying to consult as wide as we can to make sure that this skills strategy speaks to everybody. Also, community groups, I think at the moment, that probably isn't, the third sector isn't so visible within this, looking at inclusion. So there's a number of areas that as we're starting to talk to different people, we know that we need to bring out more so than what we are. So we are trying to engage as broadly as we can.
Curtis and then Henry.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for this presentation. There's a lot of information in it, so I might have missed some things. But I can see a lot of reference to 16 to 24-year-olds. And that caught my eye because I'm a counsellor in Bayton in the southeast of Sheffield. And the Crystal Peaks campus has recently closed for mainstream education. And it was the only further education facility in the southeast of Sheffield. So I'm very eager to see that this strategy going forward references that because it doesn't only impact the people who are looking at education now. I've spoken to parents whose kids are still at primary school who are saying, oh, well, I need to think of what they're going into like further down. I think that's how far parents look at where their kids can get education. So I really want to see something that addresses the problems in the southeast of Sheffield in particular, but also consults with parents as early as possible to see what they need to make sure that our kids have the skills that they need in like 20 years' time.
Thank you. So one of the things that we're currently doing is using technical terminology, way beyond me, but GIS mapping. So therefore we are looking at where there is most demand, where it's most deprived, and where our provision is and where there are cold spots. So as part of this work, we are doing quite a detailed mapping piece of work to look into that. So I can't give you specifics at the moment, it's just to say where we're seeing those spots. And we are also trying to look at travel to learn as well, recognising that sometimes one of the main barriers for people not entering into skills provision is because they simply can't get there. So we're trying to make sure that we're linking up as many different areas together. In terms of careers and awareness and support and information for parents and our young people, I am a total and utter advocate for careers and making sure we get the right information to people at the right time. I see careers as a preventative measure, and actually if we get careers provision right at all ages, then actually we'll solve a number of our future challenges that hopefully won't be there because of good careers advice and awareness at a younger age.
Thank you. We'll go for Henry and then Laura.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. Every week I'm talking to parents and young people that are struggling to find exciting jobs and a sense of sort of future upward social mobility, if you like. And I'm also talking to employers that can't find the right people. So we have this odd situation where we have widespread labour shortages in a lot of different sectors and rising levels of both unemployment and underemployment. So one big issue is, looking at where the gap is to make sure that one group are mobile to move into those jobs that are available now. But potentially an even bigger issue is the skills gap we've got coming tomorrow in terms of how we achieve net zero, given that it's going to be massively reliant on engineered solutions, and we need a huge workforce of people with the right skills for that. So how much focus is the combined authority putting into projecting the future skills gap, if that makes sense, and making sure that we do have the right skills in the toolbox going forward so that we can make that transition.
I know if only 1 + 1 = 2, skills would be a lot easier when the mismatch continues, and it's a constant source of frustration. So I think there's a couple of things there. I think there's one thing that we need to do is raise the skill level up to a certain level, but then there are also those technical skills and skills that we need. So there is work that's currently undergoing, and we probably are, if I always say I'm too honest, and I am too honest, but I think there's a lot more work that we need to do around low carbon, green, net zero, retrofitting. So there's a lot more work that we need to do, and there is focus going into that at the moment. I think it's always hard. There are some economic trends that we can see where skills requirements will be, but also quite difficult as well to understand the pace of change as well. So it's just making sure that we're getting the data that we can where it's possible. But also, I think the bigger challenge is to create a skill system that's more agile and be more responsive as well, so that we can respond to some of those acute skills needs, but also those longer term needs as well. So yeah, looking at the infrastructure to try and create not a perfect, but a better skill system than we do at the moment.
Thanks, good answer.
Laura.
Thank you. First of all, just to echo that, we need a careers service that's fit for purpose, and I think there's a long way to go on that, to be very blunt. In a previous life, or when I used to have a life, I was a member of the Programme Management Board for Objective 1 Structural Funds, and clearly there was an evaluation done of that, including European Social Fund, which funded this type of activity. So I suppose that we are looking at that and looking what worked and where we had to improve. So we're not starting from scratch, are we? I think that's the first thing I want to ensure. And you said about the third sector missing from this, and I think it is, because if we look at that mission number 3, which was around needs, those not in employment, education or training, the third sector has traditionally been very good at engaging with those. In fact, they don't go to a career service. You have to engage them at the level where they are. And it's not just about employment, it's tackling worklessness. And that is a real issue across South Yorkshire. Entrenched levels of worklessness, which we've got to tackle. To deal with some of those skill shortages. So I think what I would say is we do need to engage with that sector and learn from their experience of tackling worklessness, particularly engaging with needs. Thank you.
I just wanted to jump in on that because this is some of the feedback that I've been given to Fliss as well on this, is that actual inequality isn't in here strong enough, and with the data we've seen has been looking at local authority level, and actually geographic inequality within local authorities is really important. Employment skills are some of the most powerful tools we've got to tackle worklessness, and so that's the feedback you've already had from me, so thank you. Thank you.
Brian, you're up next.
Thank you very much, Fliss. I wanted to question a little bit about the kind of the model that you've got here, which seems like a relatively rigid one, without the connections to community organisations at the moment, which is something that you're working on. In my experience of this area, you need a range of different offers for people to be drawn into approaching work, being further skilled, being skilled up, all this. And I wondered where that aspect was, that kind of flexibility to be able to deal with people from where they are, whether they are young people or older people, and particularly an area which I think is missing at the moment, which is about community learning. So some people will be drawn into these kind of things, not through conventional training programs, but through education and learning and starting from where they are. So is there any aspect of that that you're going to be working with and working with those third sector partners on?
Yeah, apologies. It hasn't been we haven't engaged with third sector, we have. I just think it perhaps doesn't come through enough within the document as what it needs to be in the final version. So community learning is funded through our adult education budget, quite a large proportion of the £40 million that we have on an annual basis. So that does fit, and you will see interventions coming through on community learning, both within Mission Area 1 and Mission Area 3. So when we get down to the stage of interventions and actions, you will see that. We see community learning as an integral part of this skills strategy, trying to build people's confidence and get them nearer to employment if that's the outcome that's right for them.
Can I just add to that as well that there is something about the interface between the MCA strategy and the local strategy here as well, in terms of actually some of that third sector led, very local community led learning is really important for us as local authorities to lead with our partners. So some of our ESF programmes, for example, we do huge procurement exercises with the voluntary sector, and they run programmes for us in some spaces. That's definitely right for us to be doing at our level, but I think what we want to see is the hooks for it in the MCA one. So that's part of the interface between ours and MCA's, really.
I think you wanted to come back in briefly, Manish.
Thanks, Martin. It was actually on that point that I just mentioned, I wanted to ask, how do you see this interfacing, to borrow a phrase, with the employment skills strategy we're going to develop? Obviously, the next paper we have talks about SPF funding, where we've had £3.8 million in skills programmes that have come via the MCA. Your paper talks about the need for multi-year settlements. Are we also going to get funding as part of the interplay between the MCA and the local authority in developing and delivering skills work? How do you see that relationship from an MCA perspective?
So I totally agree with what Di just said. I see in terms of the strategy, we need to make sure we've got the hooks of which, therefore, as different local authorities with different needs, hyper-local, that you'll be able to develop your strategies within a framework which we all agree to. In terms of commissioning, so therefore we currently commission community learning as a grant providers to each of the local authorities, and so therefore, yes, we are looking at how we can move to multi-year funding where we can, with the likes of SPF for people and skills. That's a 18-month programme, so we're at the mercy of government on what they do for programmes there, but where we have devolved funds, that is our intention, to provide some more financial stability to therefore hopefully create programmes which are more sustainable and you're able to do things more innovatively and creatively.
And a final comment from me, Phyllis. I think you can tell from the comments you've received from members of the committee, I think there's at least 4 of us that have either been or currently educators or have some experience in education at various levels. I mean, I've lectured at universities, for example. So it's something that we all care passionately about, and yeah, it would be great when you've moved this further forward to have the other opportunity to discuss the issue with you.
I would love the opportunity. As you say, I've been in skills all my life, very passionate about the transformative impact it has on individuals, communities and businesses. So would welcome years of experience to be also fed into the development. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Colleagues, I don't have the recommendations in front of me, but I'm assuming it's that the recommendation is to thank Fliss for the presentation and note the contents. Are we all agreed on that? I'm seeing lots of nodding of heads. Fliss, thank you very much for coming. As usual, Amanda's way ahead of everybody else.
I guess just the question of when we might get an update in the future as well. But
should we leave that to officers, because there's no point having an update without further substantive progress? Is that okay with you? Okay. So now we move on to item 11, and apologies for the confusion a bit earlier. We have Ben giving us an update on the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. Over to you, Ben.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and run this through fairly quickly. So we're heading in to the final quarter of year 2 of the Shared Prosperity Fund, and you recall from previous papers that it's a 3-year programme funding which government provided to replace the European programme, and this, as we enter into a final year, the final year's allocation is equivalent to what our final year's European funding level was from several years ago. This paper just provides a sort of an update of where we are, and you'll see in the appendix there's some more details about the specific projects which SPF has funded to date. But in terms of overall progress, I think generally it's been very good. We're now in a position where we've contracted for all but 1 million of SPF, and that final programme, which sits in the business support area, we're already in the process of determining how that will be utilised. So we should be in a position probably by the March next year where we would have contracted all our SPF activity and delivering that final year's activity across Sheffield, as well as a couple of projects where we're the accountable body for South Yorkshire as well. So we're delivering on that on behalf of partners. Likewise, a couple of projects are being delivered by Barnsley Council, where we then enter an agreement with Barnsley Council rather than directly with the combined authority. I'll move on to section 1.4 of the report, which is really just to sort of highlight that some of the issues associated with the SPF programme, which really have a view of what might be coming down the line, and also to address maybe concerns about its spend to date, which I think has been reasonable, but potentially could have been better. I think, as I say, first of all, good progress. We're virtually fully allocated and contracted for our £15 million. So I don't see a position where we will be not spending our SPF allocation. I think an important part of that is a recent decision by government to confirm that year 2 underspend can be forwarded into year 3, and that year 3 funding is available. So when SPF was first announced, it was on an annual allocation, and government indicated that if you don't spend your money in year, they might withhold the following year. We've now moved beyond that to a point where we have confirmation that 100% of funding should be available. It's up to us now to spend it through the remainder of this year and into next. And as I say, underspending this year doesn't represent a significant issue. That has made a big difference. If we'd known that at the start of a programme, in effect had a 3-year programme of certainty of funding, we might have developed different projects, developed in a different way, and develop multi-year projects rather than potentially annual projects and hoping for the best for each year. And we were to some degree reliant on our gain share allocation for next financial year to underwrite the multi-year programmes we did put in place, because there was an element of uncertainty whether that funding would be available. We now don't need that gain share to underwrite SPF, which is good news, and no doubt Di will be working with you as a committee to identify the best use of that funding for next financial year. What we don't know is what will follow SPF. There is indication when government first announced SPF that it will replace European funding, and by default European funding was a 7-year programme, so I'll be looking at future years funding. There hasn't been any announcement from this government so far, but if we take them at the word, we'd like to think there will be something to replace SPF activity after year 3. Whatever government comes into place, there'll be a new government in one way, shape or form, then we're just going to have to determine whether that support is there. Again, we have our gain share, revenue gain share allocation to potentially pick up a scenario where there isn't something replacing SPF, but that's at half the amount, less than half the amount than our final year of SPF. So that would leave us in a very significant disadvantage to where we are now. It raises the questions we had 2 years ago when I first brought the paper about SPF in terms of retaining staff, let alone actually delivering the projects and activities which are vital to our businesses and residents going forward in terms of business support and skills development and some of the activities which the last paper covered. So I think overall, so our learning to date in terms of SPF, and it's been a positive experience. I think working with SYMCA on SPF has been pretty good. A collective investment strategy for SPF has worked. We've been able to get our projects through fairly painlessly. We're delivering the activity. We're going to ramp up delivery now and into next year on a number of projects which were delayed just because of the process government put in place. We didn't actually get final confirmation on SPF to nearly the end of year one, so it's quite difficult to deliver all activity in year one. And now it's a case of moving into delivery and also start thinking what follows on from that, and obviously lobbying government is going to be part of that process, working with SYMCA as well to develop a post 24-25 year strategy for a whole range of different activities which covers, as you can see from our projects, we've got community support in there, skills, business support, culture development and low carbon activity as well. It really is an important part of our funding regime to deliver some of the key outcomes for the city. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ben. Before I open it up, can I just say I agree with your comment around the difficulties in going from a 7-year programme to a 3-year programme. That's obviously created a lot of uncertainty, as you say, and challenges for the officer team working in this area. So, colleagues, any questions? I've got, should we go with Barbara first? And Christmas comes early, doesn't it? Being very we'll go Brian then, and I'll do the usual side to side. We'll go Brian, then Barbara, then Henry, then Laura, if that's okay with you guys.
Thank you very much, Barbara. So, I think we're all going to say this, aren't we? The tragedy of the loss of European funding has been well documented, and also the difficulty that you've got of dealing with it on a 3-year basis, and then not knowing what's going to happen from April 25, I think it is. However, it's something rather specific I was going to ask about. So what I notice is that there hasn't been a climate impact assessment done on this piece of work. And I wanted a bit of clarity on why that is the case. Well, actually, I'd like to know why sometimes climate impact assessments are made or not made. Because what drew my eye in here is one of the projects that you're working on, which is on page 59 or 9, depending on which paper you have, which is sustainable community and cultural assets. And when I see cultural assets, I think, buildings. Right? So if you've got buildings and they are going to be energy improved through various grants, then you have an environmental impact. So my question is, why not a climate impact assessment when you have something so glaringly obvious to me in this case?
This one. Hopefully a simple answer to that question. This is an update report which sets out the nature of the projects, and in discussion with our sustainability team we decided an impact assessment wasn't appropriate. However, when we are developing those projects, they do go through their own assessment, they do engage with the sustainability team. If it was a project being reported in its own right, coming to committee, then it would have an impact assessment completed, depending on the scale and nature of the project itself. But it's just because of the nature of this report, that's why there isn't an impact assessment associated with it. But I can assure you we do look at that for the individual projects as part of the process. And likewise, SYMCA will be asking the same question when we submit an application in terms of looking at the environmental impact of a project.
It's a quick one, Brian, because I want to share it out equally.
Yes, it's working. So where would that go, that information then? Is it actually drawn into an ongoing environmental impact assessment?
So all of the projects in this appendix have been to this committee in previous reports for approval, and at that point they had climate impact assessments. So they've all got them already, which we can happily share again. That is included working with our sustainability team around where we can do more to kind of mitigate any of the climate impacts of these projects or to articulate the benefits they're having. So they all exist in previous committee reports, and they will be monitored as we do the project management going forward at our level. And then we are asked every now and then to feed into a climate report. I think we just had one at SNR, and some of the highlights of those things. So everything in this appendix already has had an equality impact assessment. Thanks.
Not being on the committee last year, this is a kind of reassurance that I need. Thank you.
And what I can add for that project, and also the low carbon business support project, their very nature is when they're providing grants to improve and upgrade buildings and facilities, both in the community sector and the business sector. Basically, the initial start is an audit to look at the environmental performance of a building. We measure that, and then we look at, we are providing grants to improve it, and then measure that once the works have been completed as well. So it's inherent within the projects themselves that we are actually monitoring that performance and improvement.
Thank you. I'm just going to change the running order slightly to be fair to each group. I'm going to go Barbara, Laura, Henry, then Minesh.
Thank you. Right, I think you've actually answered my first two questions, but I've got a third afterwards. Right, I mean, sort of looking at the information you provided, there's a lot of zero spend to date. And sort of, can you just reassure us that you actually have the resources in place that you can deliver by the due date? Because that is a concern of a lot of these. That's the first reassurance, really.
Yes, I can assure you that those projects, particularly the skills ones, are literally, they didn't actually start until this quarter. So that's why there's a reflection of zero spend in those activities. The others are catching up. They're just being taken slightly longer to put in place, but we've got resources. Demand is kicking in. If we updated that paper today, some would have some expenditure in there, which doesn't show now.
So I thought I'd heard you correctly earlier. Right, the second thing is sort of the total cost is often in excess of the fund contribution. You did mention that you found a way of sort of meeting that, but can you just sort of confirm where it's coming from?
So in terms of the allocation, we will be contracting for 100% of that allocation of the 15 million SPF. However, there is a small SYMCA take for administering the programme, so that's why the numbers don't quite add up. But in terms of our position, we think we'll be taking 100% of what we have available, and every intention to spend every penny of that.
And this is the question. Right, page 60, cultural showcase. Now, I listened to an amateur brass quartet last night, and they were, I mean, brass bands are embedded in our culture, and they say they get absolutely no funding whatsoever from any source. And I'm just thinking, sort of, you know, if we're showcasing the culture and history and heritage of Sheffield, how can these groups get the funding to sort of maintain them? And if you can't answer that question now, can you provide me with information so I can then sort of tell the groups how, you know, where they can access support? Thank you.
Yeah.
Diane's better place to answer that.
Thank you. Yeah, in terms of the SPF money in the cultural showcase, we had to, as part of kind of our submission, outline where we were going to spend that money. So that is already done in the committee report that came here before we submitted that. So there isn't money within SPF potentially for that. However, there are other sources of funding. primarily project grants through the Arts Council. So if people are looking for that kind of investment, if they can contact us as the culture team, we can help them navigate some of the funding. We don't have a lot of pots like that as a local authority at the moment. What we're trying to do is offer kind of support in terms of bid writing through our feasibility funding. We're trying to leverage some of our other skill sets that we've got through our pipeline fund as well. So we haven't got direct grants often, but it's the power we've got with other funders and the ability to help them write bids.
No, that's useful because they couldn't get any funding. I don't think any brass band, amateur brass band, has funding from the Arts Council. So if you send me the contact details, I can provide them to the group just to see where it progresses. Thank you very much.
So I was going to go to you next, Laura, but you done?
I was, similar to Barbara, I was just questioning the spend and also the outputs, because it doesn't look like the profile that we're going to be able to get the outputs that we need. So that assurance is helpful.
In which case I'll go to Henry and then Minesh.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ben. Slightly repeating comments that have been raised already. Every time I see that SPF replaces the European Structural Investment Fund, my hackles go up a little bit because I don't think it's directly comparable. You've mentioned that it's much, much shorter for a start. From what's in the report, the Council's delivering a reasonably broad range of projects with SPF. You seem to be monitoring it effectively, and I'm quite reassured by all of that. I'm really curious about what's not in the report in terms of what can't we do under SPF that we would have been doing if we were still in the EU. Do we have any sort of record of that? Do we know what projects didn't make the cut?
Quite a difficult question to answer. But there are a number of programmes which, under the previous European programme, aren't being delivered or being delivered at a smaller scale. So one of the programmes which we delivered on behalf of South Yorkshire was called RISE, for example, which provided SMEs with graduates. So it wasn't a graduate placement programme, it was an employability programme for SMEs to actually access graduates, sometimes for the very first time, and giving them an experience of different quality of potential candidates. We weren't forced to take them on, but it gave them the opportunity to access graduates. That programme isn't running as part of SPF. We may well have carried on with something or adjusted it going forward. I think the other element, as I say, is actually some of these projects are now running at a lower level in terms of funding. So in the business support world, where we've got what's called productivity in the tables, which is in effect a grant programme for businesses to invest in their own business, and they get a percentage of that investment through SPF. We would like to have a far larger allocation of funding there to provide larger grants and support more businesses in the region. We just don't have the capacity to do that. So the loss of European funding definitely has an impact, both in terms of the number of projects as well as the scale of the projects.
Thank you, Ben. I'll continue to await some sunlit uplands appearing anytime soon.
Thank you. Good question. Good answer. Minesh.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Ben. I won't repeat concerns about the lack of long-term or multi-year settlement, though I wonder if at the end we might want to revise the recommendations to be stronger than noting our concerns. I had a quick question about the High Street Business Information Officers, because it's something that members of my group do often raise to me, of wanting to have a bit more detail about the range of work they do, and I think there is something in how we can ensure we are fully embedding all of the learnings we're getting from that real in-depth and on-the-ground work. And I wonder if we could get a note maybe for all members of some of the learnings we've had. I know I've seen things in the cost of living reports to SNR building on the IOs going to different areas, and I think there is a lot of really valuable learnings that maybe we could do something more with.
Yeah, no problem. I think that's a really good idea. They're the glue that hold a lot of things together, actually. They work really closely with the LAC teams. They work really closely with high street businesses. They give us a really good information flow of what's it feeling like out there. They help us shape programmes. They've been critical in ERF, as well as getting a lot of high street businesses through the pandemic into a better cash flow position and accessing other grants and support. So yeah, I think that's a really good idea. We can definitely do something from a written briefing perspective, but it might be worth actually commissioning a proper evaluation of that work. Thanks.
And just to add, the final year, the element of funding which we haven't actually committed so far, it's likely that some of that money will go towards a further year of high street information officers, which I said they've really facilitated a lot of other activity outside of just working with the high street businesses in their relevant patches.
So thank you, colleagues. Good questions, good discussions. We have a recommendation in front of us, but I'm just going to follow on from something that Minesh said. I'm going to propose a slight change to the wording so that the recommendation is to note the progress of the UK Share Prosperity Fund programme in Sheffield, and the committee shares the concerns raised in respect for future funding for economic development activity. I think that picks up the point you were making, Minesh. If that's acceptable to everybody, everybody agreed? Don't see anybody disagreeing, so we'll go with that. Thank you. Thank you, Ben. Next item on the agenda is social value, presented by Laura. Guys, thank you for your patience. Over to you.
I'll just do a quick introduction just to say that we're going to actually put a Form 1 in to do a more fuller report on this social value item in February or March, where we will have actually some real recommendations. Whether those recommendations can be made by EDS or they have to go to SNR or elsewhere in the council, but looking more broadly at the motion that came through full council. However, as we started this work, it felt really valuable just to share the work that the team within our directorate has been working on at the moment, because it's very impactful, just to kind of get that conversation started. So Laura's going to take you through the annual report that's been circulated to you in advance, and let you guys introduce yourselves first.
Hi, yeah, it's working. Hi, so I'm Laura Hayfield, Head of Employment and Skills.
And I'm Stephen Arundel, I'm the Social Value Manager at Potter Law's team.
So, as Guy says, we've just come today to present the annual report for 22-23, which we produce every year. And we have done since 2010, because Sheffield City Council was an early adopter of including social value within contracts, particularly around employment and skills, which was ahead of the first Social Value Act in 2012 and the subsequent legislation that asks local authorities to gain added value from the activities it undertakes. We started work very much with capital delivery services and moved on to working with planning services and then wider procurement to incorporate employment and skills outcomes, and they include things like jobs created, new apprenticeships, work experience, schools engagement, individuals upskilled, and we put that into the specifications and the commissioning process, score it, etc. So in section 1 of the report, you'll see the achievements made in 22-23, working with contractors of the council. That included 235 work experience opportunities delivered through school programmes and through the Sector Routeways programme. Nearly 50 project-initiated apprentices, so they are new apprenticeships, not counting any existing apprenticeships. 800 new job starts, which is amazing and isn't just about jobs being there, but those jobs are filled with Sheffield residents, and over 6,500 upskilling of Sheffield residents within those workforces in a variety of things, and particularly because we do well with construction, this has enabled some green skills development as well. The figures have consistently grown since 2010, that's because we get to include it in more contracts as we go forward. There's been an increase in construction in the city. The types of contract we apply it to, so we've done some work this year with a care contract and a fleet maintenance contract. And Steve and his team, well, Stephen is one member of staff, work really hard to facilitate and monitor the outcomes as well, so they don't just go in contracts. We then do work of introducing those contractors to local apprenticeship providers, local schools, and other employment projects. Section 2 focuses on improvements that we wanted to provide in the service this year, and I won't read them all out, but a couple that I particularly wanted to mention was the broadening of the work experience placements and offer within schools, which has really motored in this last year. And the agreeing of priorities for Sheffield City Council contracts against the themes, outcomes and measurements framework, which is like a national social value framework, to include more things than just employment and skills, so thinking around the environment, social and economic outcomes we can achieve for the city. In section 3, there's just some case studies and gives more of a flavour of specific projects and events that have been enabled through the social value work using case studies. And then in the appendix, you can see there are some subsets. So they're all part of those overall figures that I went through in section 1, but it can be divided down into the added value of being able to get out of housing, for instance, or planning services. And we do collect all of the data around this, so we can also report on demographics of the people that we've been able to support or gain benefit for through the work.
Thank you for that. Before I open it up, I'm going to take Chair's prerogative and ask a question. So, Laura, you mentioned our ability to link with contracts that the council places. Is there a formal link with organisations where we provide grant funding? So I'm not singling them out, but for example, we had the decision earlier on about DocFest. Are we able to use our influence, if that's the right term, with organisations where we place significant grants to try and leverage some more social value?
We don't do that at the moment, actually, in a thorough way, and this is one of the decisions that we were looking at, actually, in terms of all grant and procurement activities. Are there certain thresholds where this should be just a to-do, a standard to-do, but that isn't there at the moment. So grant agreements often come with their own terms and conditions that we have to adhere to, and there's a mix there. And again, procurement, it's not embedded across all different kind of thresholds. So some of the things we were discussing is that potentially any revenue procurement over £250,000, could we embed social value in it? I don't think that's a decision that this committee can take, but it's what we want to start to get into in terms of exploring some of the implications of those. And, for example, when we are giving grants of a particular scale, what we can expect on the back of that in terms of social value. So it is an area that we're looking at proactively going forward, but at the moment we don't do that as practice.
Thank you very much. I've got Laura indicating.
Thanks for that. It's very helpful. It's mainly with large organisations, this, and I'm thinking about the third sector. You know, Diana, we talked earlier around the skills agenda and working with the third sector. Often procurement and commissioning is flawed, shall we say, with the third sector, and they're asked to jump through hoops that large private sector organisations don't have to go through. And it's often treated if it's grant funding, so they want to know how many paper clips you buy, rather than looking at the outcomes. We don't expect that of any large-scale organisation. We count outcomes and outputs, but with the third sector, the commissioning and procurement, I think is still flawed. It always was when I was going through those hurdles, and it still is. So I'm just wondering if we're looking at that to how we can change it 20 years later.
I mean, we do work really hard with our voluntary and community sector partners around the strategic approach to commissioning. It is, you know, legally there are, you know, a lot of hoops that do need to be jumped through. But we work really hard in employment and skills with the voluntary and community sector employment and skills group, and make sure that we do a lot of consultation about the way in which we procure third sector organisations and services. And I think they would agree that we have certainly made some improvements over the last couple of years.
I do think there is improvements across the council that can be made there, and there is a trade-off between adding more of these things into the procurement process and that setting a bar that actually SMEs, other types of businesses as well as the third sector don't feel like they can access. However, the converse is true. Lots of SMEs that I meet actually are adding much more social value into their local areas than some of the larger contracted ones brought in. So it's how we help them to tell that story. So we've been doing that work in detail in certain areas with certain employers and with the third sector, but it needs some clarity and investment across the piece to do it more consistently as the council and to look at that. In fact, just last week, the Diverse Business Board, obviously that feeds into this committee, asked to have a conversation around this. So their procurement lead, Glenn, came to talk to them about how we procure at the moment, and there's going to be a subgroup set up to look at that going forward and how we can help capacity build within our SME network as well as the third sector to bid for and win council contracts, and within that be able to articulate their social value.
Sorry, I was just going to just give a flavour of some of that as well. That one of the feedback we had about the contracting process was that we were unable to show some of the journey travelled by participants who were receiving support from voluntary and community sector, so that we were looking solely at the employment or the training outcome as a result of contracts, and that's something we've been able to develop for the Shared Prosperity Fund so that we can have a better appreciation of that. But also just to reassure you that these social value outputs are considered on much bigger contracts than certainly we give to the voluntary and community sector. So this particular piece of work isn't asking for those smaller contracts to jump through any hoops.
Okay, thank you. I've got Barbara, then Henry, then Minesh.
Thank you. I'm assuming that I'm looking at the educational activities, employment, sort of apprentices and work experience. Now, I'm assuming that if anybody's successful, they've got to then put their trainees through a programme, and one of the outcomes has got to be achieving, say, a level 1 or a level 2. Now, what concerns me is, having taught a lot of post-16 non-achievers, there's a whole group of people who've got really impressive skills, but they'll never be able to achieve a level 1, level 2. And I'm worried that they would be disenfranchised by a lot of these schemes. And I'm wondering if, for these sorts of people, is there any kind of certification of competencies that has ever been thought about? Because these are the disaffected youth who then go on to create problems because they know nobody values them for what they actually can do, just for a qualification on paper, which to them is meaningless because they can't achieve it. Thank you.
Certainly the situation with apprenticeships is that in order to get to the level 2 qualification, they do have to have a certain standard of particularly basic skills to be able to enter those. The way we work at the moment is to try and do bridging non-regulated qualifications to support them through family and community learning, for instance, to support them to get to that level where they are at the entry level for apprenticeships.
That's my point. A lot these can never achieve that for all sorts of reasons. Sometimes it's it's bad experiences at school, sort of the mindset, whatever. And if they know they've got to achieve a written test, a qualification, which level 1, level 2, even entry is, and I've taught entry level, you know, sometimes it's just a language thing, dyslexia, something like that. You will never be able to get them onto some kind of program where they can show their worth. And I know a lot of people who really thrive in the outdoor environment, you know, sort of even in sort of like a gardening type scheme, whatever it is, parks, you know, but they're still forced to go down this sort of qualification route, and it's just not for them, and they can't do it.
Yeah, and it certainly has been one of the unintended consequences of the raising participation age. So up until the age of 18, young people now need to repeat certain basic skills qualifications, but apart from that, we very much then work with people to try and get them into employment, as I say, by doing unregulated learning and learning which can be very practical, which then support them to grow confidence and be able to then get in, achieve work from that programme. And that's across there's a massive range of different people in different circumstances that I know that you're alluding to there, that there are tailored programmes through the SPF programme, through the Family and Community Learning programme, sorry, pointing at Richard Smith, my colleague over there, who oversees that, to support those people directly into work rather than, if you like, trying to push people through a qualification system that doesn't suit them.
Thank you. I mean, that wasn't apparent from the document that you've produced, that in fact there are other routes through. So thank you for that.
Henry.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Laura. You said that Sheffield was sort of ahead of the curve on embedding social value targets into our larger contracts, which is fantastic news. For the big contractors that have got this in as part of their contracts, are they now seeing the benefit to their companies, or is it seen as a cost of the contract to them?
Yeah, so obviously, sort of at the same time as we've been pushing forward with social value, there's been a massive increase in corporate social responsibility understanding by employers. So certainly a lot of the larger contractors, for instance, that one of them, for instance, is Amy, who obviously are a strategic partner of the council, and we work with them for them to take on 26 new apprentices every other year. Now, we were just doing a meeting the other day, weren't we, Steve, where they were talking about the difficulties they have with an ageing workforce, particularly in that sector. Also, they particularly have a struggle with attracting people from ethnic minorities, particularly into highways contracts, and they have a problem with having as many women as they should within the workforce. So there's all sorts of benefits that you can explain to businesses of engaging with this type of activity, but this gives us a real start, it gives us a foot in the door, and then it ends up being more of a partnership working, if you like, where both parties can see the value of it for us, for our residents, and them for their workforce.
Well, I hope we reach a point where it's seen as part of business as usual, and if we pulled the contractual requirement, they'd continue to do it.
That certainly is the case with a lot of these larger businesses, and something, it's been particularly done in construction and across the country, and it's just always construction who are first at the door to sign up to our apprenticeship events and things like that. So I think it does have a long-term impact.
Thank you. And then finally, we've got Minesh.
Thanks, and thanks for bringing this report. I'll actually jump to off the back of Henry's point before I make the actual points. I think Henry's right. There is something really important in getting the story and narrative from businesses themselves, and where we have examples from Henry, but I think there is something quite powerful in pulling that together in a testimony of here is how we've worked, or how Henry worked with us to lock in more benefits to the wider economy. And I think the more we can do in press or anything else to tell that story, the better. So this is a really great report. I've seen the previous version as well, which gives some of the wider economic figures, and I think it's really valuable, and I think it's the kind of thing we should be making so much more of. I know far too often sitting up there in full council in the chamber, we often talk across all sides of the financial limits on councils, that we don't have enough money to do the things we want to do. I think this is one of those clear examples of where we can lock in much more wealth into the economy at comparatively low cost to ourselves. I think what I'd really be interested in, I'm really glad we're going to have a wider report coming, is what do you see of the immediate opportunities available to us if we do add more clarity and investment to our social value work going forwards. But, you know, some of the numbers here of, in the last year, 1,400 people upskilled, 200 people with work experience programs, 800 new employments. That has a huge economic impact for our local economy, and it's something I think we should all praise and note for the fantastic work that is happening, and do as much as we can.
I think that was a statement rather than the question, but do you want to come back on that?
I guess the question is partly on the storying of it, and then that's the question.
I certainly think in trying to broaden this, we need to articulate that story much more so it becomes part of the package. So what we'll do is we'll work up some of these ideas and options that we've already got really almost ready. We need to discuss them with procurement, legal, finance, with members, and then they might be needed to be taken at different committees. There's some of the planning ones, for example, might need to go to TRC. It might be that we have a discussion here. I know that that motion was kind of recommended to us to have a look at, so we might want to recommend those actions back to other committees. So we'll look into that. But certainly I think that what you said around how we communicate this and telling the story of the benefits of this from a business perspective really play into that as well. So it needs to be a much more coherent approach, I think. So yeah, but we can do case studies. I'm sure Stephen's got plenty. So.
And I think Laura wants to come back in briefly.
I was going to keep quiet, and actually try and quantify it, what value it adds to the economy. That's a very good story to tell, what benefits this is bringing into the economy. And if we can come up with some standard figures for an apprenticeship, a job, etc., a notional one perhaps, but if we build that into everything, then that would...
Yeah, absolutely possible, Laura. There's, well-known sort of metrics and quantification of what the value of a new apprenticeship, a new job brings to the economy, as well as some of those other things. So, some of, and wider than employment and skills when we look at the environment and economic growth as well. So we'll build that into the future report we do.
And then Minesh, I think you've got a last little comment.
Thanks, Martin. Just prompted by something that I said, and I think it's not for this, but for the wider committee and probably governance to think about. I've spoken to other councils where they do split up planning decisions between committees where, for example, this committee would take over commercial planning decisions and TRC would have, or housing, maybe would have housing. And I know Islington, for example, do a lot of really interesting procurement work through their economic development portfolio because they have that direct oversight. I think it's something we potentially don't do enough because it's not in our gift. So maybe it's something I think we could suggest to governments to look at, the need to actually let committees that have a political oversight of an area also have policy oversight. But I don't know if I'd go as far as making that recommendation.
Yeah, I think I understand what you said.
So yeah,
just
commercial planning.
Yeah, I'm just mindful though that in some of those things we've got legal procedures that we have to follow, for example, in planning. So should we take that, as our American friends would say, under advisement and allow officers to have a think about that one?
Can I just add that Governance Committee has got a remit to look at the work, to look at Policy Committee remits, part of its work programme, that could possibly feed into that stream of the work programme from governance.
Well, I think we can take the action for officers to look at that for us. Is that okay? So with that, so first of all, thank you very much for the presentation. You always know when it's a good one when you get lots of questions. When we sit here and don't ask anything, that's the opposite. But thank you very much. With the slight modification that we've just had, the recommendation is to note the contents of the report Are we all happy with that? Thank you very much for coming and look forward to the next update. Thank you very much. So colleagues, that brings us to the end of the agenda. Unless anybody has anything else, our next meeting is on the 21st of February. So let me just say, see you on the other side. Have a happy Christmas and see you in the new year. Thank you very much.